It is Wednesday, January the 24th, 2018. I'm Gord Long. As is normally the case, we have a lot of charts for us to go through this morning, so therefore we will pass over some of them quickly, but leave you to examine them further at your leisure. You'll need to open your viewer to full screen viewing, or you'll not be able to see some of the detail I'll be discussing in the charts. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. The purpose of the audio is to discuss key developments in those areas not specifically updated in this month's macro online updates. The research document this month updates U.S. economic developments. Therefore, the slides this morning will focus on our other three report areas of our monthly report, the global risk, macro, and regional economic developments. As I often do, I'd like to tie them together into a single discussion concerning what I see as the major 2018 tipping points and themes. This is based on our highly structured abstraction research methodology. I would therefore like to cover the items outlined here. Going into last year, we were tracking close to 33 tipping points. We thought 33 to be high, but somewhat expected the overall number to fall off going into 2018, with fewer but those ones likely being more elevated. What we've identified, however, going into 2018 are 44 tipping points, with 11 categorized as high risk. High risk, presently now the largest we've ever had, going back to the pre-dot-com era when we first started tracking tipping points on a site specifically called tipping points. Our tracking methodology is unquestionably telling us that global and U.S. risk is at extreme levels. This doesn't mean that something is going to happen imminently, but it does suggest that a small spark could presently set off a major destabilizing shock. We've also seen a significant increase in the number of elevated risks, shown here in the second column. Those below the ranking of 22 have worsened, but those above 22 have degenerated even more. Maybe more telling is new tipping points have emerged and have been added to the 2018 list at already elevated levels. In the high-risk category, we see that U.S. stock market overvaluation are up significantly at a number 2 ranking going into 2018. It was high at the beginning of 2017 and made the high-risk category, but is now a major destabilizing concern. The policy shift of the central bankers is a new tipping point that is shot right up to the number 11 spot. The reason is because the global financial markets are now so highly over-leveraged from a protracted period of easy credit that to start withdrawing the abundant liquidity is a serious issue to the global markets, which has never been attempted before. Few fully know what to expect. The Federal Reserve has now started its normalization program to reduce its balance sheet, while the ECB has initiated its version of what I'll call taper, and both Japan and the Bank of England are reducing the rate of liquidity injections themselves. It has always been the role of central banks to take away the punch bowl, just as the party got going. But this has been a humdinger of a party that has been going on for a decade now, specifically since the 2007-2008 financial crisis. There is going to be a significant, unprepared fallout if the central banks actually follow through with their announced policy guidelines. Only recently has the bond market began to actually believe the central banks would. It is now starting to shake the bond market, our number 3 tipping point. We see more clearly here with the elevated risk tipping points the number of new ads I was referring to, or in the case of terrorism, it's becoming much more dominant globally. A lot of our new tipping points were actually themes we were watching in 2017, which have deteriorated and risen to the potential of being economically, financially, or politically destabilizing. Inequality at number 12 has risen because of the disparity between who has been winning and who has been suffering through the asset bubble created by the central bank's sustained easy money policies. The top 5% of the population that owns assets have won big. The bottom 95% not so, while experiencing the inflationary effects in the form of higher education, health care, housing and rental costs, and salaries not keeping up with the cost of living. This is now leading to potential growing social strife. The Eurodollar shortage at number 13 is something few talk about or understand fully. Global lending has been more and more conducted in U.S. dollars, primarily because of the relative stability of the U.S. dollar. However, the levels of debt and rollover needs are putting increasing pressures on global lending needs for more U.S. dollars. The Federal Reserve and its swap facilities have averted a number of crises so far, but the problem continues to deteriorate with no solution readily apparent. Expect to hear more about this in 2018. The global financial system complexity and fragility at number 14 is also an increasing concern because of growing and poorly understood counterparty and custodial risks, as well as 1.4 quadrillion or higher of derivative risks almost completely unregulated with poor and missing global regulations. De-dollarization, listed at number 25, is quickly becoming a major concern. This is a different problem than the Eurodollar problem. Here, the issue is about the disintegrating petrodollar regime and the lack of U.S. dollar exports versus the size of paper claims on the U.S. dollar around the world. We have already seen the two largest holders and buyers of U.S. treasuries, that is China and Japan, stop buying and to start reducing their U.S. dollar foreign exchange reserves. This potentially places large pressures on U.S. debt supply, therefore possibly raising interest rates higher than the U.S. economy might be able to actually withstand. We have a continuously slowing growth rate of the global savings pool, a new tipping point, and now ranked number 26. This problem will increasingly become a serious impediment for the financial markets in regards to securing sufficient investment capital, and maybe even more importantly, new, unencumbered, and non-rehypothecated collateral. This problem is central to the big reversal theme we'll talk about a little later. The gutting of the working middle class has been a theme of ours for a few years now, but we now see it to be a potential destabilizing tipping point. The degree to which the U.S. has become a subprime economy, the levels of household indebtedness associated with payday loans, home equity loans, student loans, credit card balances have left the U.S. consumers strapped for discretionary income. In a 70% economy like the U.S., this is a serious problem that could be even more aggravated with a cyclical overdue recession and advancing forms of job-replacing robotic automation. The U.S. consumer has long been the mainstay of the U.S. economy, and for that matter, the post-World War II global economy. A weakening U.S. consumer is something the world has never experienced and is ill-prepared for it. Not to go through all 44 tipping points, but I do think it important to mention that items like cyber attacks and the resulting unknown complexity failures shown at number 38 should not be ignored. Often major crises arrive from something in common view, but is taken for granted until it suddenly tips the scales and rapidly destabilizes markets and economies. One of the many reasons that the tipping points are important to our work is that it forms the basis for launching our abstraction methodology, which is the foundation for our many investment theses during the year. We share some of them with you as part of our Strategic Investment Insights, SIIs, that thinking and watch list. They are not recommendations, but rather simply outputs from our research for your consideration. We take the tipping points shown here on the left and try and identify patterns and relationship groupings. Then, over the course of the year, we attempt to synthesize these into ideas or concepts that may not be self-evident. Our Mata SII theme section, videos such as Under the Lens and Long Wave, articles, papers, macro maps, etc. are all just tools which are all part of the work we do during this process, which we share with you through our ongoing postings. The culmination is our annual thesis papers listed on the right. This year, it is the New World Order, which we'll talk further on in a moment. One of the many maps we have laid out to assist us with identifying themes to watch for is shown here. This is a sequential roadmap with key blocks or trends we should be expecting. There is no time frame with it, as it depends on the sequenced events. We could spend a lot of time on this graphic, but we don't have the time for that today. To position what we should expect, it needs to be built on a clear framework of where we have come from. First, when you start to consume more than you produce or simply choose to live beyond your means, you obviously start to build up debt. You have a lack of savings and soon have slowing rates of productivity improvement in the overall economy because of a lack of investment into productive assets. It isn't long before the economic system is forced to move to a fiat currency system to keep the economic system afloat, which we did in the United States in the August of 1971. Improvements in standards of living slow, capex expenditures slow, and the velocity of money falls. The economy is then forced towards financialization as macroprudential monetary policies, such as financial repression, are adopted by the powers to be. These policies force unproductive risk-taking, poor lending practices, malinvestment, and excess levels of leverage into the economy. Soon, public, fiscal, and monetary policy issues become center stage to expediently handle the unintended consequences. Kick the can down the road seems to become the solution of the day to avert continuous crisis. If any of these sound familiar, it is because that is where we are today. As the requirements for the growth of financial investment grows to support debt and leverage levels, the slower growth rate of savings becomes a bigger and bigger problem. Government policy programs consume larger amounts of the productive assets and savings of the economy. Soon, a shortage of new collateral to secure new borrowing becomes a real problem. Instability makes existing collateral values more volatile. This leads to even greater shortages of lending collateral. What soon happens is the currency of the economy becomes exposed as foreign lenders call into question the collateral value underpinning that economy. As the currency begins to fall, hyperinflation begins. Hyperinflation is first and foremost a currency event. It rapidly accelerates with governments having fewer and fewer options left at their disposal. Like Venezuela today, social strife soon consumes daily life as one failed attempt after another is foolishly tried until the economy resets in a devastating fashion and policies of sound money are once again forced to be restored in some fashion. The crisis fosters new systems, new policies, and even new institutions. You can see from the red mark in the center star where we feel we are today and what therefore lies ahead. The area I label as rising rates comes about as part of the big reversal I mentioned briefly earlier, and we will see as something we are looking for over the next 1 to 3 years. Again, I'll talk a little more about that in a moment. Let me show you another one of our roadmaps. This one you have no doubt seen before. We've had it since the financial crisis when we first put it together. The 2007-2008 financial crisis effectively took place in the upper left corner. To possibly be oversimplistic, it was primarily U.S. housing-centric and financial in nature. Yes, it had spillage around the world, but it was primarily a Federal Reserve and U.S. government problem. Since the underlying problems we felt were not fixed at that time, we felt that the central problems would only grow and issues would become economic in nature and much broader and regional in scope. By 2012, in fact, we had massive banking problems across the EU, Greece, and even down to Cyprus and East Bloc nations, impacted by poorly capitalized and unsound European banks and banking practices. It has been our view, and continues to be, that this is leading to even greater numbers of problems, which will be both political and global in nature. If we are correct, then our tipping points and emerging 2018 themes should be now beginning to signal this. These are some of the key new themes which our process has isolated as we begin 2018. You will notice immediately that they are heavy in the political and global sphere, just as we expected they would be. We didn't pull them out of thin air or from the nightly news. They came from our 2017 year-end tipping points and themes that were growing throughout 2017. I have greatly simplified this matrix, removing a lot of the connecting lines, to isolate and illustrate what I showed on the previous slide. We already have 5 political themes to start 2018, and we can expect more to emerge through the course of this year. Where they are signaling we can expect this to happen, that is more, and more reactive government policies, which we labeled simply whatever it takes policies, with which to maintain the status quo. You'll recall our 2016 thesis was entitled Crisis of Trust. Last year, Charles Hugh Smith and I did a number of macroanalytics videos on what we can expect from the quickly emerging 73 million millennial generation. One was termed Millennials, a Menacing Metamorphosis, and the other was called College Has Become a Racket, both in one in April and one in May, and I refer you to our Macroanalytics YouTube channel. The Bank of International Settlements, or the BIS, released a groundbreaking paper last year, which I labeled The Big Reversal in a macroanalytics video I put out in the fall of 2017 in collaboration with Charles Hugh Smith. I encourage you to listen to it if you haven't already. You will recall from a few charts ago the period of rising rates that we are entering and will be with us in an increasing fashion for the next few years. That video on November the 2nd was termed The Results of Financialization Part 3, The Big Reversal. The Big Reversal is centered on shifting global demographics, capital investment and savings levels, and pending entitlement payouts and borrowing demand or supply. Investment will continue to grow, but the rate will slow slightly, driven primarily by the maturation of the capital intensiveness of industrialization. Simply said, it takes capital to start a factory than start a software company. The growth rate of savings, on the other hand, will also slow, but at a faster relative rate. This is driven by an aging population and a slowing global birth rate. Entitlement program promises are coming due in a massive way and will need to be funded. There are currently $84 trillion in unfunded and underfunded U.S. government entitlement requirements alone. Supply generation of debt is going to balloon. At the same time, the funding availability for demand will be crimped. The result can be expected to be rising funding rate and a shortage of unencumbered collateral to support new lending and debt creation. I refer you back to our cycle slide shown here and the red marker in the center for a reference of where we are, right on track and to be expected. I would like to close by mentioning we have just released our 2018 thesis paper entitled The New World Order. It discusses many of the trends currently underway that were themes in 2017. It attempts to outline what we can expect in the way of new forms of global sovereignty, governance, exchange and trade systems, and institutions. It tells us that the network is the way, and it is changing the world in a manner few fully appreciate and completely grasp. Your future investments will be determined in a major way by this shift. So in closing, remember, the answer will be to print more money. It is the only answer politicians will ever agree on. That is, until no one wants the currency or trusts it. Invest accordingly. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there has seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not following what has traditionally been the true and tried approaches. Do your reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2018 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. And I thank you very much for listening.